Hi, BookTube. I was going to say, welcome to another nonfiction review, except this isn't just another nonfiction review. This video is going to air on the 31st of October, and that's because it will be the final day of my Read What I Own challenge, and the book we're reviewing right now is number 53 of the 53 that I set myself to read. Yeah, so you're going to see a little cheer on the next screen. I did think when I decided that today's book was going to be number 53, that maybe I was making a mistake, that maybe it would have been better if I'd chosen a lighter, happier subject matter instead of the one that I did. So we're going to talk about a book that examines early class conflict in England, a protest against oppressive treatment in which what you see on screen now was one of the slogans made popular by the priest John Ball when Adam delved and Eve span. Who was then the gentleman? And it was basically questioning, where did the social order come from if it didn't exist from the very beginning? So centuries ahead of the English Civil War, there were questions being asked about who had decided the social order. Today, we're looking at Summer of Blood, The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 by Dan Jones, published by Harper Press in 2009. Let me summarize this book, or better, let's let Dan Jones speak for himself, because he admits that his subject matter is not easy to sell. He sums up the general view of all medieval history as, quote, dirty, distant, a little alien, or just quite boring. He aims to bring that history to life, however, for a greater number of readers. And let's set a scene, because he does, and the story is more exciting than you might think. In the summer of 1381, England came dangerously close to complete social breakdown. A wave of plague in the 1350s had cut the population by half, and that meant a shortage of labor, which unsettled the whole economic order. The common people were pressing to get some advantages in their localities just to get a better quality of life. But the costly 100 Years' War was draining royal finances, and Parliament was looking for a new source of funds. They chose to levy a poll tax. 4 or 5 groats from every man and woman, regardless of their income or even if they had one. That was the equivalent of 5 days' wages for a skilled craftsman, or 10 days' wages if you were a farm laborer. Well, that tax was the spark that lit the fire of unrest. In Essex and Kent, makeshift armies gathered, and they marched toward the capital, and they attacked all the property belonging to the church or the landowners that they passed along the way. Word spread in all directions, and within days there were similar commoner armies that had gathered in Norwich, Cambridge, Peterborough, St. Albans, Leicester, Beverley, and York. The critical event, however, happened in London when those men from Kent and Essex, helped by intelligence from a lot of dissatisfied Londoners, they succeeded in forcing the adolescent King Richard II, his mother, and his closest council to shut themselves in the Tower for their own safety. I would say that Dan Jones, in his writing style and in the length of this book, has gone out of his way to be accessible, and that may disappoint his academic colleagues, but even they must admit that something now needs to be done to redress an imbalance, because the emphasis right now has pretty much reduced English history to the Tudors, the Victorians, and the Second World War. What do we know about the author? Daniel Gwyn Jones was born in 1981, and he studied history at Pembroke College, Cambridge, graduating with a first in 2002. Summer of Blood was his first published book, and he continued to produce another 6 works, all of which focus on aspects of English history before Henry VIII. In 2022, he made his fiction debut with Essex Dogs, which is the first in a trilogy of novels which follows the fortunes of a platoon of archers and men-of-arms during the 100 Years' War. You'll find a link in my description box to Dan Jones' Penguin Random House page, but also you're going to find a link to his IMDb page, because he's also a well-known journalist and television presenter. He's hosted a number of programs about medieval and early modern English history, and he's a regular contributor to a number of well-known English publications and has a column in the London Evening Standard. Let's talk about how this book is structured. My paperback copy is short. For a work of nonfiction, it's only 238 pages, and 211 of those are the text itself. I feel that Dan Jones or his publishers really worked to make this book more attractive, more approachable to people who wouldn't normally read nonfiction. There's 22 chapters plus an introduction and an epilogue, and if you average those, each of those sections is less than 9 pages long. And the font, yes, it's about 11 point, a little on the small side, but there are generous margins on all sides of the page. Now, the paratextual materials, maps, illustrations, and so on, not as comprehensive as you might get with a more academic work of nonfiction, but very well chosen. At the center of the book, there were 16 pages glossy paper with illustrations, including the Gough map of England, which dates from 1360. And it was really interesting because it showed that English cartographers, they hadn't explored much. They really had a vague idea of what the northern coastline of the island looked like. And so, frankly, Scotland resembled a sock. That's what it looked like. And there were 3 maps at the front of the book, which were really helpful, particularly the detailed map of London around the time of the reign of Richard II, showing all the gates in the city wall and the entrances through which rebels came. That was really helpful. And instead of a long bibliography listing all the references he used in his research, Dan just adds a 5-page essay where he talks about the most useful sources to him, which I thought was better aimed. Then there's just 9 pages of notes to explain things better that were in the text and a subject index. Now, how did I get this book and how much did it cost? Well, this was a library book, so thank you, local library. I tell you what's interesting, though. I was actually browsing for something to read in the fiction section when I pulled this book off the shelves. And that, again, to me, says something about the publisher's attempts to make this work accessible. The size of the book, the cover graphic, etc., all of that had obviously fooled a member of the library staff into thinking that they were dealing with a novel. Summer of Blood is available as an audible audiobook on Amazon UK. The Kindle edition is available on both Amazon UK and Amazon US. I think it's £4.99 or $4.99. And then also the paperback, £14.56 in the UK, $15.62 in the US. Secondhand copies, couldn't see anything online that was particularly cheaper. What I noticed was selling online was mainly the hardcover version. So let's talk about why I chose to read this book. Well, the main reason was that I knew that there was a peasants' revolt in 1381, or maybe if you asked me for the date, I would have struggled a bit. But nevertheless, I didn't know more than that. And when I picked up this paperback copy, there was a recommendation on the front cover by the well-known television presenter and historian David Starkey. And what he said about this little book was, quote, "It's bold, surprising, unputdownable." And I remember thinking, well, that's a big claim for a work written about a little-known piece of medieval English history. And I wondered, was David Starkey a friend of Dan Jones, and did he owe him a favor, and this was it being called in? I don't know. Whether he did or whether he didn't, the book does hold up to David Starkey's evaluation. So what did I find interesting or unexpected about this book? Well, when I reviewed Africa is Not a Country by Dippo Fallian, you remember that the last part of the book made the point that African nations are young nations, and so their difficulties may not be specific to Africa, but may be really just the problems that are specific to young nations. And that was on my mind when I was browsing in the library, and I wondered whether Dan Jones' history of 1381 was going to demonstrate the same kind of levels of tyranny, government corruption, sharp social inequities, acts of violence and terror that we don't associate with Western Europe, but we do associate with the Third World. And England in the 1300s was a tiny country, with an economy totally based in agriculture. It had annexed Wales, but Scotland and Ireland were independent countries. London had a population of only 40,000 people, and King Richard II was only 10 years old when he came to the throne in 1376. Now, some of his wards, like his uncle, John of Gaunt, ran the country with their own personal agendas in mind, spending money that England didn't have to win little parcels of land across the English Channel, which were only going to be more expensive to hold on to. And disease had killed half the people in the nation only a generation ago. And yet that didn't stop the fighting or the oppressive treatment of the poor. Now, does that or does that not sound like a third world stereotype? Is there anything that readers should be prepared for if they choose to read this book? The sources available about the revolts, unfortunately, they're almost exclusively written by those in power and not by those who revolted against power. And that's a challenge for any historian. It means you're not going to find as much information from those who weren't allowed to leave records. And some readers might consciously or subconsciously see Dan Jones' book as favoring the established order. Personally, I felt Dan Jones did his best to be fair, but there is more personal detail in Summer of Blood about the king and those close to or loyal to him than there is about the rebel leaders, Wat Tyler, John Ball, Geoffrey Litster, or Jack Straw. And there were several times during my reading when, I wished this could be a longer book. I wished it could cover in more detail the years immediately before and immediately after the revolt. I wished it could get more up close to the lives of everyday people. But every action has consequences. A longer book would have looked like any other monster volume of history. And I love them, but they're the sort of books they're never going to trend on TikTok, are they? They're never going to attract a really broad audience. And I think Dan Jones took a choice. He made a sacrifice of being comprehensive. So he chose to be less comprehensive in order to get something different out there in the public eye, something that might make more people aware of history. And who knows, this little book, which could be mistaken for a novel, it might be somebody's gateway into the past. It might make them decide they can tackle a longer work of nonfiction, and that would be worth it. We'll end with this photograph, which are commemorative figures that are supposed to represent Wat Tyler and the rebels, and they are in the Wat Tyler Country Park in Essex. Let's talk about any ideas for related or follow-up reading, because after all I've said about Dan Jones writing these short, accessible works, it's also true that he's written a number of much longer works of English history, and the reviews in those all mention his capacity to make history entertaining and approachable. So I'm going to recommend his 2022 work, Powers and Thrones. Now this is 720 pages, yes, I'm sorry, but it covers the history of all Western Europe from the fall of Rome to the beginning of the 16th century. Big, comprehensive sweep, and I'm very tempted. I see that our county library has got 3 copies of this book, all of which are available. So very tempted. Fantastic. Oh, and that's another review done. You know, I feel a little emotional wrapping up book 53 of 53. I never would have guessed, how much this year of reading what I own has helped me. I discovered that the books that were already on my shelves were, for the most part, really well chosen. And I learned how easy it is to say no to buying books, that it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. And in fact, I feel different about book shopping right now. Okay, maybe that feeling won't last, but right now I feel the way I did when I let myself purchase my third, okay, I can't do this to camera, my third wildcard purchase. I was in Foyle's bookshop on Charing Cross Road in London, right? 4 floors of books to choose from, and I could only buy one. And so this incredibly different browsing process happened, where first I had to look around for all the books that I might want to buy. Then I had to narrow things down to a short list, and then I had to narrow things down further and pick a finalist. And that process was unexpectedly enjoyable. But let's see what happens next week, shall we? When I've got a complete amnesty from all book-related rules. See, that is going to be the acid test, isn't it? Book 2. You will hear from me again on Sunday, the 10th of November. But in the meantime, may you all be blessed with unput-downable reading. Yeah. Okay. Take care, everybody. See you again soon.